So I'm sorry to have held up several people. So we start with apologies, and I've given mine. Any other apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Professor Almendinger.
Okay. Yeah, under the rules, as may have been explained, we're probably one of the only democratic bodies in the country where everybody has to turn up to be able to start a meeting. So any declarations of interest? Thank you, an even longer microphone, thank you. None? Okay. Minutes of the last meeting. Any matters of correction? Are people happy that I signed these minutes?
Aye.
Thank you. Which brings us on to item 4, questions from members of the public, and I think we've got 4 of them. And our proposal is that we take 2 of them on each of the relevant items.
Yep, 2 of them.
So we've got 2 in relation to MIlton Road item 8, and we've got 2 in relation to item 10. Yep. Okay. Yep. So are the people asking questions happy with that? Okay. Good. So we then move on to the report from our good friend, Councillor Wotherspoon, who reminds me that I refer to him as a country cousin, but that's purely in humour. So, Councillor Wotherspoon, as Chair of the Joint Assembly, if you could introduce your report, and obviously you're free to contribute to the items each in the agenda.
Thank you, Chairman. And of course, we are in the town of Camborne now. So let's not be too condescending about the country cousins. But we have this little thing going about the country cousins in South Cambridgeshire, which we quite happily bat one to and fro. Right, we're running a little bit late, and you've got a very big agenda in front of you, and so I commend to you the report on pages 29 to 34. It's a very full report, and we had a very valuable and incisive set of discussions on the items. So I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can. Starting at item 2, the Assembly was very keen on addressing local grid constraints and liked the opportunity to invest in an electricity substation, especially because of the impetus behind the electrification of transport. However, they were very keen to ensure that it would be a revolving fund, a rolling fund, rather than a plain expenditure or investment. So that's something that they were very keen to pass on to you. There was a lot of interest in the closure of Mill Road Bridge and the potential that offered for monitoring the effects of severing this artery into the city, in particular effects on air quality, the modal shift, park and ride patronage, and so on. Members were also very keen to make sure that the impact on local businesses was monitored too, some of whom are anxious about the effect that it might have on them. Towards the end, there was a mention of some concern about the planning system and the way in which GCP projects are included in consideration of planning matters. And as he put it, planning conditions have the ability either to enhance or to frustrate the delivery of strategic projects. And there was a feeling that the joined-up thinking could be improved a bit. On the future investment strategy, one member was particularly pleased that we were sort of wrapping up this first session and looking forward to the second Gateway review. So that was a feeling of forward thinking positively. Last year, of course, we were particularly preoccupied with the question of alignment with the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough combined authority, and it was suggested by one member that we should also be cautious of making sure that we're aligned with other strategic schemes, in particular everything that's happening in the Oxcam corridor, the expressway, and in particular East-West Rail. Risk management raised its head, and there's a feeling that perhaps some of the joint funding that we're taking into account may perhaps not materialise, match funding and Section 106 funding, and we should pay careful attention to that. One very valuable observation, I thought, was that, okay, we're making choices about the things which we are going to do, but in doing so, we are deselecting some other things, and bearing those in mind was perhaps equally valuable as concentrating on the things that we are doing. It was stressed that while the impression, initially at least, might be that the City Deal, Greater Cambridge Partnership, had been transport for transport's sake, that absolutely wasn't the purpose of signing the City Deal. Transport is intended to be an enabler, particularly in relation to housing. And given how much is happening locally, there was a little warning that actually there is a potential skills shortage. We need to be mindful of capacity, and that the construction industry around here, even around here, may have its limits. And reference, I think, was made to the fact that the A14 people would almost certainly be decamped to the A428 from Black's Cat to Caxton Gibbet once the A14 Huntingdon to Cambridge Improvement Scheme is completed. Now then, on to the A10 Foxton level crossing bypass and parking. The Assembly had a very wide range of views on this matter, and I think it's fair to say that they were mutually incompatible. So some members were quite excited about the possibility of freeing up road traffic on the A10. For example, one person raised the spectre of emergency vehicles trying to get to Addenbrooke's being delayed by the current closure of the level crossing there. And of course, it's not just the road that could be improved, it's the rail capacity which could be improved by not having that level crossing. On the other hand, there were many people who felt that actually having some sort of choke on the A10 at that point was quite valuable in terms of encouraging mode shift and indeed reducing the pressure on park and ride facilities closer into Cambridge. I'm not quite sure how you're going to deal with that, Chairman, but that was the conundrum which the Assembly passes on to you. A lot of interest in the development of a park and rail transport hub at Foxton, but members were mindful of the impact that would have on the local village, particularly given the number of spaces that might be required. And then there was some concern about exactly what interdependence there might be between the two projects, the removal of the level crossing and the park and ride or park and rail hub. And at this point, I think I ought to draw attention to the letter that I've received since the meeting from the chairman of Foxton Parish Council. I think you've all had this letter, so everyone's nodding. He refers to having had a full and frank discussion with GCP officers, and we all know what that's code for. But anyway, it's quite a useful letter, and it doesn't really give a steer as such, but he would like to highlight some things that the parish council would like to bear in mind, and I think it's only fair if I just raise those for you. First is, and speaking as a resident of Cottenham, we've done our own neighbourhood plan. Foxton is very keen that you should bear in mind the thinking that they're doing on their own neighbourhood plan. They would like you to respect the openness of the green belt in any proposals that you may bring forward. They want to ensure that any transport hub must be mindful of integrated transport, particularly bus and cycling connectivity with nearby villages. And in that respect, they're sort of echoing the Cottenham question as to, how does this benefit residents of villages who are off main lines, as it were. Having said that, they're also very concerned about internal connectivity within Foxton itself. So please bear that in mind. And the most important thing they seem to stress towards the end of the letter is that every time the village is being consulted about this, they have expressed a clear preference for an underpass rather than a bridge for all sorts of reasons, and they would like you to retain that as an option in any further consideration that you give. So I hope I've given that letter appropriate treatment there. Right, on to the Cambridge Biomedical Campus Transport Needs Review. This was a very detailed piece of work. Many suggestions had gone into it. It was members pointed out that the report demonstrated the severity of problems which were already happening now, not in 5 or 10 years' time. And given the growth aspirations of the Cambridge Biomedical Campus, the situation required urgent attention. Indeed, one member drew attention to the comparison between the transport figures associated with the growth of Stansted Airport, and said that there would be an equivalent number of traffic movements associated with the Cambridge Biomedical Campus as with Stansted Airport. That's a fairly chilling piece of information, which I think is worth bearing in mind, Chairman. There were 47 suggestions. I think there's still 47 in the paper in front of you. And so some members felt that actually they could do with prioritising. You can't do all 47 at once, even though they're all very beneficial schemes. They need a bit of attention. Some concern was expressed that the only demand management tool which had been factored into the transport assessment was parking restraint, and there were other demand management options out there under discussion, and they may have had an impact on the figures. Andy Williams, as you know, from AstraZeneca, they'll be moving on to the site, and he stressed how strong the level of engagement had been, very positive engagement with all the stakeholders on the Cambridge Biomedical Campus. There's an acute awareness that short-term problems are huge, and they are all determined to work together to try to solve them. So, the Chisholm Trail, well, what's not to like, really, I think, was the message from the Joint Assembly. And you will have heard since, Chairman, about the sod cutting ceremony on the 8th of March for the Abbey Chesterton Bridge. The Chairman of the County Council yesterday was boasting of her participation in that little ceremony. Very good. I'm glad. I'll report that back to you, back to her. Thank you. Right, MIlton Road, bus cycling, walking improvements. Well, we'll be hearing further from the chairman of the Local Liaison Forum, Councillor Jocelyn Scott. She's sitting there. She reported 2 resolutions from their meeting. They wanted a biodiversity strategy, and they would also like to be consulted on any further substantial changes. When we had our discussion, members referred to how effective the liaison with the Local Liaison Forum had been, and this has resulted in an excellent scheme. And given where we had been in the past, that was quite a transformation, and full marks to all those concerned, not just on our officers' side, but also for the huge involvement of local residents. There was a discussion about whether to keep trees on roundabouts or not, and one member who's a cycling champion at the County Council suggested that it's actually better to have no trees on roundabouts because cyclists can see what's on the other side of the roundabout. On the other hand, transport officers said, well, actually, trees on roundabouts are quite good for safety because if drivers can't see what's on the other side of the roundabout, they tend to slow down as they approach. So there you are. Pays your money and you take your choice. The Local Liaison Forum is particularly keen that you bear in mind the possibility of public art along the route, and they requested a working group can be set up to consider the residents' parking implications of whatever scheme we end up with. Right, rural travel hubs. This was a bit of a downer, this discussion, I'm afraid. We started off with representations from Oakington and Westwick Parish Council. They thought travel hub was great, but they didn't want any parking, which sort of kind of defeats the object. And one of the district councillors for Cottenham, as you know, is a neighbouring village to Oakington and Westwick, and Cottenham residents are have repeatedly expressed a desire to be able to access the busway through Oakington, but they can't park except antisocially. And she said that a hub without spokes is not a hub. And I thought that was quite a good way of summing it up. So little support for the Oakington and Sawston rural travel hubs, but a lot of backing for the planned consultation on the Whittlesford Parkway Station Master Plan. And one member summed up the discussion on the rural travel hubs by saying that GCP should be focusing on projects where it could make a step change, and the feeling in general was that the rural travel hubs at Oakington, Westwick and Sawston might not be able to do that. Okay, that completes my report.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive, but please feel free to contribute as we move into the agenda. In a change to our normal running order, we have as items 6 and 7 our budget setting and quarterly monitoring report, including on finances, and then we lead into a bigger report, item 7, the investment strategy. So on item 6, if I could ask Niamh, and I think Sarah Haywood is also here, and Sarah doesn't have to wait quite as long as usual. So Niamh, if you could introduce the report, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Dan Clark is also here to talk a bit about some of the smart stuff that's going on this afternoon. So it just might be worth running through, I suppose, some of the things in the report, some of the opportunities that it sets out that we don't necessarily advertise on the recommendations here, to give everyone a flavour of some really exciting stuff that's going on and how we're progressing it, and then take any questions on that stuff. So in my mind, we talk for maybe a minute on grid capacity, and then ask Dan to talk a bit about fibre ducting, and then we'll give you the good news about our skills service at the end of that. So on grid capacity, you'll see from page 48, the Economy and Environment Working Group have been looking at grid capacity and if there are any constraints. And from some initial research, it would suggest that there are fairly significant constraints. I think the group feel, in light of the fact that constraints on the grid is likely to have a significant impact on further growth and development. They would like to know more about the opportunity for the GCP to try and alleviate some of that. An initial proposal is emerging, which, as Councillor Wotherspoon set out, looks like the potential for a rolling fund or some sort of recoverable investment of about £25 million that would be recovered as developers link up to the grid. And we want to ask the board to support for £40,000 worth of funding to do the next stage of that research. So any questions on that we can take at the end. Moving on then to fibre ducting, so you can see on page 41 the proposal, but we thought maybe Dan could give us a couple of minutes on what the principles are.
Yeah, certainly. So digital connectivity is obviously really important for residents, businesses, and for new technologies that are emerging, particularly in the transport arena. So we've got an opportunity now to embed ducting within new schemes which will future-proof connectivity across the area. 90% of the cost of deploying fibre is actually in the civils, so if we do it now as part of new schemes, we generate huge savings, and it also means that we'll have the connectivity that we need in the future. So the County Council have just adopted a strategy which will see new fibre being and also ducting deployed in new schemes across the county, and we're now asking the GCP to follow that lead and adopt that policy as well.
Thanks, Dan. We can take any questions on that in a minute as well. And I guess the final thing that I was going to bring out is that we have been able to procure an organisation, or two rather, to run the GCP's apprenticeship service. We did discuss it in the Joint Assembly. So Form the Future and Cambridge Regional College won the opportunity through a procurement process to do that, which I think is really, really good news. The service will run over 2 years, and actually, despite what the report says, is now underway. So they're already mobilising activity, which is really good. So that should be celebrated. I'm happy to take any questions on the recommendations or anything else in the report.
Okay. Any members of the board want to raise any questions? Councillor Bates.
Thank you. I'll kick off, Mr. Chairman, not necessarily in any particular order. Started with on page 38, which is about the affordable housing, linking it actually to the revision of the local plans in both authorities. I'm coming to a view that we need to be more ambitious in this particular area, and I would wish perhaps we'll come on to that, I'm sure, within the budget, but I think we need to be more ambitious for affordable housing within those two authorities linked to the local plan. So I understand where we've got to at 6.3 with the amount we have delivered and what our target is for 31. But I actually think we need to stretch that a little further as we go forward into 36 and beyond. So that's something perhaps that needs to be considered. In respect of, I'm not quite clear, Neve, I'm on page 39, 8.2. The involvement of the Cambridge Regional College, perhaps you could fill us in a bit more on that, please. Fully support the suggestion, particularly as I chaired the meeting last week, and it may be suitable for the minutes to reference the report which went to the Economy and Environment Committee on the 14th. It would just then give an opportunity for members of the public to see what was discussed in one organisation and therefore being asked to support it in another. So suggestion is to put it in the link in so that people can see it within the minutes. Apologies, Mr. Chairman, I had a lot to say. I'll keep going. Some of the issues in relation to 19, which is about the suggestion about electrical buses. What it did not say was where they will be charged. That's an important point in having electric buses if you can't charge them. I think we're going to be talking about the grid later on and things like that, so I'll leave that. I just make the point in respect of page 49, which is about funding, section 106, and there was no mention of SIL, and the biggest call for section 106 actually is for schools, health, as well as transport. So I make that particular point. I understand the tension between the funding, but just remind actually that the system for collecting and discussing section 106 is in fact the transport, the viability kicks in, and then affordable housing comes after. Funding shortfall, linking that actually, that's on page 50, which is about the shortfall, which really takes you back to the Gateway Review. Okay, understand where we are financially. In theory, there's a shortfall of 50 million, of which we hope that we get through the gateway. That's the 200, and therefore it's actually not 200, it's 150. So please bear that in mind. We don't have a complete pot of money. And also, I think that did not include at 23.2, it says it did not include any development at the Science Park and Water Beach. So it's not actually 150 million, it could be considerably more. And I'm sure both would support those two developments. It's just actually, if you like, making sure that the amount is calculated within our suggestion going forward. Apologies for being a bit long on that.
Thank you. Do you want any specific comments back from?
No. There's a few we can have. You can have some comments, but content with the recommendations. They're really just observations and comments, and I think we need to just take on board some of those issues, particularly about, say, the finance, which is not, when you look at excluding things, it just adds something. Yeah. I have no problem with the recommendations, Mr. Chairman.
I'll take any other comments and then bring Neve back in. Councillor
Rundblad. Really just responding to Councillor Bates' point about the affordable housing and the exception sites. I mean, I think now we have got our local plans, we are starting to look more seriously at getting the exception sites programme back on track. And so I think it's once we've sort of got a bit more of a feel about what is achievable, I think we should absolutely be thinking about the ambitions that we can have in this regard.
And that was always going to be a programme in South Cambridgeshire. So, yeah, we'll have a look. Claire Ruskin.
Two quick comments and one question. Firstly, I fully support the economy and environment work on the grid scheme particularly. I think we hadn't recognised, or many people around the world haven't recognised, that the electricity supply is going to actually stop the developments that are already planned, let alone anything in the future. So we have to do something about that, and fully support what is proposed there. I've been part of the conversations. Secondly, fully support the Smart Places work, especially the ducting, and I would like to thank the officers that bring these things to our attention, because I think, again, it's not interesting stuff that we think about all the time, but there are many things that have been proposed and are now in place that keep us at the leading edge in this region, so I'm very pleased about that. So thank you for that. The question is on the housing. Are these numbers high enough? So I know the numbers were those that were planned when the city deal was originally arranged, but it strikes me that we're growing faster than we knew we would be at that point. So the numbers that we've got in, we're feeling quite content about, but should we be looking and exploring further? In particular, should we be making sure that they are connected adequately, as opposed to just plonked in a field somewhere and then left without a road?
Thank you. Do you want to come back on some of that, Niamh? And I might add a couple of points.
Yeah, of course, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Bates, if I pick up your point on CRC, I think that was one of your questions. So CRC and Form the Future has submitted a joint bid for the skills work, so that's why they will jointly be delivering that. Does that answer your question?
Could you just a little bit about what they're going to do?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I think probably a short explanation is that when we tested the market, what the market told us, and schools told us, and providers told us, and young people told us, was that there isn't really a way to link people that are looking for an apprenticeship with businesses, and vice versa, to link businesses with people looking for an apprenticeship. So essentially this service, I've been describing it as a bit of a bridge between prospective apprentices and businesses. So a linking service is maybe the best way to describe it. Matchmaking, a dating service, some people have described it as. I don't know, Aidan, if you want to add anything, does that add up as the chair of the...
No, except just to say how exciting it is to get this going now and be really pushing this area, and it will be as the combined authority strategy comes forward. I think that'll fit in very well with that.
Thank you. And I think on Section 106 funding, on funding generally, there are unknowns about some of the amounts at the moment, and we are working closely with finance and with county and district colleagues to understand exactly what those figures are and what percentage of them will contribute to our significant strategic schemes. So a bit of reassurance, I suppose, on that point. Sorry, Sarah, is there anything you'd like to add?
Just that the spreadsheet of the table on page 55, the figures in the budget assume that we are successful in the first gateway review and we get the additional 200 million. So even with that additional 200 million, the figures here show a 50 million shortfall. I just want to confirm that.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, just on the... Yeah, on the ducting, I think obviously it would be good to just check that the combined authority is following that line. We're obviously going to come on to a couple of the issues on the next item. You haven't said anything really about the electric buses. How far has that got? I am impressed by the new leadership that Stagecoach has got, and I'm hoping for big things.
So we're looking to work with Stagecoach to secure a fully electric and a hybrid electric vehicle so we can test them in slightly different environments. I think the question was where it would be charged. We're still working with them. It will be at one of their operational depots. The fully electric has a capacity of about 150 miles at the moment in terms of its on-road testing. So what we want to do is to make sure that you don't have to take it off the road during during the day to charge it up to put it back on the road. So that's the work that's ongoing with Stagecoach. I would concur that having met the new managing director, I think that she is very interested in developing the bus service in the Greater Cambridge environment, and we need to do what we can to support that.
Just going back to affordable housing, I think one of the challenges that the GCP always had was that the deal that was agreed and started in 2015 didn't come with a penny piece in terms of funding. So the target that was set was a voluntary challenge without any funding. So I think that was why we followed through with the funding bid for both South Cambridgeshire and ourselves in different ways for the devolution combined authority. So I think there should be some opportunity for some of these schemes to qualify for that, as well as benefit from developer contributions. So yes, we can do more, but this particular item, as Councillor van der Veer said, is recharged by the adoption of the two local plans, but it really does it does need to be looked at, and yeah, if input from Neve and others can assist, then obviously we're very happy to assist South Cambridgeshire.
Yes, I mean there's no expectation of direct funding for it, but there will be many other ways in which the GCP and the combined authority can support that aim. Yes.
Perhaps some clarity for people, particularly which is in the recommendations, which is about the 400k to support Stagecoach. One of the reasons I asked that is Stagecoach has moved their headquarters to my division, and actually it's in Fen Stanton. So I just want to make sure that it works come the day, as when we do get two buses, that it doesn't run out of electricity halfway down the A14. Thank you.
Well, although Cowley Road is in the development area for North East Cambridge, clearly if there's going to be electric buses and vehicles, then we need to provide stabling and charging on the city fringe at the very least. Is there any more information, Peter, about exactly what the charging arrangements will be?
No, because we've not finalised them with Stagecoach, because at the moment we're just seeking approval to enter into the deal. What we've deliberately done is chosen a fully electric and hybrid electric, bearing in mind that we want to target this in the areas of air pollution to get the immediate benefits. And so I would concur with the Chair's comments around the need for these to be charged within the vicinity of the air quality problem. There is no point in having fully electric, the fully electric vehicle in the short term running down the A14 empty, just to get to the depot to recharge.
Be it that the A14 and M11 have got air emission problems of their own as well. Okay, well, thank you for all of that. And I think the only other bit, I think just for the benefit... Tim, sorry. I hadn't forgotten you.
I've been sitting here ever so slightly uncomfortably since something that my colleague, Councillor Bates, said. And I have to tread a little bit carefully because I am a county councillor and I'm the Vice Chairman of the Economy and Environment Committee. And so, of course, I recognise how important education and transport are in weighing up Section 106 contributions. But I was, until recently, the Executive Member for Strategic Planning at South Cambridgeshire District Council. And I have to be a little bit careful as well because my successor is sitting directly opposite me. But
Hats do you have?
I would like to raise the profile of affordable housing because the affordability of housing is actually central to the planning process. And at the end of the day, it is a balancing exercise in the hands of the local planning authority. And having achieved an average affordable housing level proportion at Northstowe, the first half of Northstowe, of 41%, which is just above the target level. I am quite proud of having done that. And so I do hope that South Cambridgeshire District Council continues to weigh affordable housing and other potential Section 106 contributions very wisely in the major developments which lie ahead. Thank you.
And that underlines the fact that no one can assume that planning gain is for transport. It has to be for the essential features of development, and we certainly don't want to miss out on affordable housing in any look at how we fund transport. Good. I think all three parties are agreed on that one. So if we go to the recommendations in front of us, we've got 5 of them. Are you right to take it on block, given that we have had a discussion about each of them?
Yes.
Okay, can I have those in favour? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you. And thanks for all of the work, including our not always here visitor, Dan, and also to Sarah for the finance work, and to Niamh, particularly on the skills project. So I presume we'll hear more about the skills project. But I've moved briskly on to item 7, and that is the forward funding strategy.
Thank you, Chair. The future investment strategy is in front of you today, and actually does follow on very neatly from some of the discussion that the board has just had in agreeing the 1920 budget. Councillor Bates was just asking questions around the shortfall and also around the priorities that we attach to things like housing. What the future investment strategy provides the opportunity for is actually to look at the much longer term delivery of the city deal and the ambitions that were set out when the deal was first signed. But I think it's really important when we face the first gateway review towards the end of this year that we're able to put a very compelling vision to government, not only of what you have achieved in your first 5 years, but also set out what you think you're going to be able to achieve over the course of the next decade if you're able to unlock that funding. So this set within the context of the assurance framework that was signed at the time is just setting out that very ambitious programme and showing actually what you will be able to achieve. Prioritising transport, because as the Chair pointed out, that's what was intended as part of the deal, but also putting housing there in a longer list of issues that we think you would want to address if other funding comes forward. My colleague Isabel is just going to take you through that in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Rachel. Isabel?
Well, thank you. So the Executive Board considered a paper on the future investment strategy in March last year, and as Rachel said, this updates it to help with preparations for the Gateway Review. And it's seeking the Board's agreement to the process and criteria for prioritisation of future investment, as well as an initial prioritisation and a longer list of projects. There's a few points to draw your attention to on the process and the criteria. So when the city deal was signed, the partnership agreed to use an assurance framework to decide how funding would be spent. And that's large, as Rachel said, largely based around transport objectives, but set within a wider set of strategic objectives around growth. So taking that together with our evidence base, which continues to kind of reinforce the case for a transformational solution for Greater Cambridge, it's likely to mean focusing the investment primarily on transport, but with targeted interventions. So in developing the criteria, we've used the assurance framework as a starting point and translated those criteria into more measurable kind of aspects. The Joint Assembly, as you heard earlier, made a number of very useful suggestions about the criteria, which we've considered, and we've made some changes. So there's a kind of in Table 1 on page 59, that's the kind of new list of criteria. And these will be used at both a strategic level to determine the programme and then also at a scheme level to determine specific interventions. So at a strategic level, the initial prioritisation reinforces the case for GCP's current work on the 4 CAM corridors, as well as looking at service provision and infrastructure investment, in particular the energy investment that was discussed earlier. The paper suggests indicative allocations for the different projects, which, taken together with existing commitments, takes the overall spend to around 627 million. So again, against a grant of up to 500 million plus the match funding. So we're also asking Executive Board to agree to keep a longer list of projects under consideration, which could be prioritised as further work to identify that much funding and to secure the government grant is undertaken. It is a document that will evolve over time, so as kind of further work is undertaken to develop the projects, particularly with the 2 additional studies coming forward on the CAM corridors, we'll come back with a fuller prioritisation at a future date.
Isabel, any points to add? No?
Yeah, I'll kick in.
Councillor Bates.
Just a few observations, really. I'm on the table 1 on page 59, and it's the overall where it talks, the one second from the bottom, where it talks about schemes which link into the Greater Cambridge City deal and linking it to devolution. I came to a view that we haven't perhaps needed to consider where Highways England fits in, when you look at the 4 to 8 that might be coming forward. And then I added Network Rail, and then I also added sub-regional transport bodies, because they tend to have a view, particularly related to transport. I wondered whether that just needed to be expanded a little bit, possibly. And the other 2 actually is, I noticed in the priorities that we've set, those suggested criteria, there's nothing on the housing and there's nothing on the skills. So I wanted to see where that fitted into the priority of the new schemes that might come forward and how that links in. I'm not opposed to the priorities, but I think it just needs to be perhaps thought through in respect of housing and skills, because we do have responsibilities in that area, as Neve's just said, with a new provider. And I then moved to page 61, which is about ranking some of them, which I think just comes down to some ranking when we get to that point, to know what we want to do, 1, 2, 3, 4. Appreciate that might well change. And I, as you can see, stayed up late one night to read all this. And I go to page 63, and that's about the projects. Number 1, about the CAM, and it talks about Wisbech and towards the east. I thought it would be useful just to actually put where we are with other suggestions like Cambridge to Campbell. And it wasn't suggesting these might be, I appreciate their initial, but I think it might be sometimes useful for public documents in particular to say where we are currently and where we're going. Sometimes it's useful. Other than that, Mr. Chairman, I thought it was fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire?
Only comment would be in response to Councillor Bates' question there. I would say that the strategic filters actually do incorporate the skills and smart and things. So it's about economic growth and the labour market, which I would say is one of the measures, one of the filters that we could use. So I'm not so worried about adding those in.
Just for my two penneth, I'd like to add modal shift and cycling and walking into other policy impacts, because I just think specifically there's a value in having a reference to them. And I think it's wholly right to talk about how existing homes and communities and jobs are linked, but I think we also need to just reference education, because there's significant movements of people between 16 and 19 in particular, over fairly long distances. I just adding those really just so that those issues are referenced when we start to assess projects. That's all I want to add. I mean, I think we've got a fairly big programme already, but clearly, in addition to serving the CAM network, it's quite critical that we deliver the 2 routes that we're already working on, and in addition, the Waterbeach route and the east route out of Cambridge. And that way, with a fair wind, CAM will happen, but we'll have nonetheless a network with the 2 existing routes of 6 really strong ways that people can get in and out of Cambridge by public transport. Anything else? So on page 57, we've got 4 recommendations, and we've also got the points that I think from the Assembly that I hope will also be thought about in terms of the criteria and other aspects. So are we happy to take those as a vote? Can I see all those in favour? Again, we're in agreement. Thank you. Item 8 is the significant amount of work that has brought us to this point on MIlton Road. So I think, first of all, I'm going to ask Jocelyn Scott as chair of the Local Liaison Forum. Thank you, Jocelyn. And then after that, we'll have a look at Matthew Danish's response and also then take the questions from Lilian and Maureen. Thanks, Jocelyn.
Thank you. I'd like to start at the end, if I could, and then work forward or backward, however one looks at it. The residents and the Local Liaison Forum are concerned to ensure that we have some grasp of the time frame of this project. I mean, what will happen next and how we'll be informed of what will happen next. Just that it would be good if we could be kept informed of progress. We're not meaning monthly reports or anything in that nature, but simply that we don't want it to fall into a dark hole and then suddenly we see that there is activity on the road and something is happening in, I won't say concrete terms, but I mean in indefinite terms. So if it were possible for the board to give us some information now or in due course as to what the progress will be and how we'll be informed, we would be appreciative. We would also be appreciative, the Local Liaison Forum of MIlton Road, if we could be kept informed about what's happening on Histon Road too, because I want to come to a point that Councillor Wotherspoon, a colleague of mine on the county, made, and that is that there does need to be an alignment of strategic schemes, and the MIlton Road scheme and the Histon Road scheme are effectively influencing each other, and residents on MIlton Road are going to be impacted by what's happening on Histon Road, and those on Histon Road are going to be impacted by what's happening on MIlton Road. So that if we in MIlton Road could be kept informed as to progress on Histon Road, and also I would request at this stage that Histon Road also be kept informed as to what's happening on MIlton Road. And I come in this regard to the resolutions that came from the Local Liaison Forum to which reference has already been made. One of them related to biodiversity and the importance of biodiversity in terms of the MIlton Road scheme, that we request that a biodiversity strategy for MIlton Road be developed in relation to MIlton Road, and here I would like to extend that to Histon Road too, simply on the principle that, as I've said, both these roads are impacting on residents who are living on those roads or on the offshoots of on the residential roads that come off those two major residential roads, Histon Road and MIlton Road. So if a biodiversity plan could be devised and implemented in relation to both those schemes. There's also still the concern about parking, because there was to be developed mitigation in relation to the parking that was to be removed from MIlton Road, and similarly with Histon Road. Now, fortunately, at the Assembly, there was agreement that there needed to be proper communication between relevant councillors, particularly from the Elizabeth Way roundabout down to Mitcham's Corner, the county and the city councillors, the county officers who are addressing parking issues, residents' parking schemes in particular, and the residents of that whole area. That would be what's called under the residents' parking schemes Elizabeth, Asham and Hurst Park. Hurst Park is not going forward, Hurst Park Estate, with the residents' parking scheme, but they are going to be impacted by parking places being taken away from MIlton Road. It's inevitable that people who live up near the roundabout or in that part of the road that comes from Elizabeth Way down to Asham, they're actually more likely to go and to park into Hurst Park, I would say, than in Asham, even if they're included in the Asham residents' parking scheme. So I am appreciative of the fact that Paul Vandenbalk is endeavouring to get everybody together in that regard, but I'd just like to emphasise here the importance of ensuring that the county officers are involved too. Now, in relation to landscaping, the concern has been raised that we are sure that the funding for the landscaping is available, and the landscaping will be implemented in the positive way that it's been proposed, and that is both for MIlton Road and Histon Road, because as I re-emphasise, they both are effectively linked. And there's also been raised the issue of air quality and stress that will impact when the schemes, that is Histon Road and MIlton Road, are underway in terms of construction. So we would like the board to be mindful of the impact and to take such steps as can be taken in order to ensure that air quality is monitored and that there is a program of construction that is least impactful in terms of the stress of the residents. Now, I just want to refer to two other really quick points because everything has been covered very effectively, as one would expect, by Councillor Wotherspoon. But on the public art issue, I do want to say thank you to Paul Vandenbalk, because he's already been in touch with Maureen Mace, who's the resident who was particularly concerned about that, and she is meeting with the business that sponsors the Elizabeth Way roundabout. So that's another positive step that's been taken already. And then I also want to refer to the issue of trees on the roundabout, because everybody associated with the MIlton Road scheme with whom I'm acquainted does want to retain the trees and other growth, vegetation on the Elizabeth Way roundabout. And as was said, this was raised by my other colleague on the County Council, Councillor Noel Kavanagh, as to the potential difficulty of cyclists seeing over the trees. But I have to say that Mr. Peter Blake dealt with this question in the most admirably diplomatic manner at the time, and we are resting assured that we will retain our vegetation on that roundabout with the biodiversity implications that are present. So I would simply like to end by saying again that I'm so appreciative of all the work that the residents and residents associations have put in, that my councillor colleagues have put in, and that the officers, particularly Paul Vandenbalk, but also the consultants, because the way that the scheme has developed has been so positive, and that would not have happened if there hadn't been the acknowledgement and commitment to the need to consult with the residents and to have the residents associations. We were the first local liaison forum that actually had residents associations represented on the forum, and that was a really positive move. I remember on the first meeting a statement was made that did not commit the Residents Association to anything that was happening in relation to MIlton Road. But I can just say that we are extremely fortunate that the Residents Association did come onto the local liaison forum and were prepared to be sufficiently open-minded at that early stage that we've developed that the scheme has been developed in the way it has. So I'm just simply ending on a note of thanks, and also to the Assembly and to the board for the way that the Assembly and the board have received the reports that we've made and the positive progress that's been recognised. So I thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And thank you to you as well for chairing it and remembering back, and I'm looking around the room to see a few faces. Not everybody in the room was at an earlier, less productive meeting at the Meadows Centre on this project, but we've come a long way. So we've got two public questions, and the first one emphasises, or we've also got an email that the board's got in front of them from Matthew Danish about some details. So I'd ask Peter if you could reference that in responding also to the two public questions. The first question is from Lilian Rundblad, and that emphasises the overlap between MIlton Road and Histon Road. If Lilian can ask first question, and then Maureen Mace. Welcome, Lilian.
And good afternoon. I'll talk then about the air quality on MIlton Road and its impact on surrounding roads, including Histon Road. So the Greater Cambridge Partnership supported and part-funded the Smart Cambridge project. It sought to collect and analyze air quality monitoring data from across the city using innovative sensing stations developed with the University of Cambridge Chemistry Department. The Smart City data collection platform already exists and measurements could be made publicly available. HRR supports the proposal that monitors be placed at 2 or 3 locations along MIlton Road to compare results before, during, and after the construction phase. HRR also supports this proposal because of an objective of the MIlton Road project is to improve air quality, and the air quality of MIlton Road affects the surrounding roads, including Histon Road. So HRR requests that in recognizing the objective to improve air quality is an aim of the MIlton Road project, and the air quality of MIlton Road and Histon Road are directly linked. The Greater Cambridge Partnership directs the MIlton Road project manager to implement the proposal that monitors be placed at 2 or 3 locations along MIlton Road, and further directs the Histon Road project manager similarly affect plans for air quality monitoring for Histon Road before, during, and after the construction phase of that project as well, and ensure budget for this purpose. Furthermore, could the data be displayed and made easily available to the public? Thank you.
Thank you, Lilian. Maureen, can you add your question, and then we'll get a response from Peter before we introduce the report. Thanks, Maureen.
Hello. First of all, I'd like to thank the officers for listening to the residents who travel on foot and bicycle in the area and for making their journeys much safer. However, I'm a little bit unclear about what actually happens near the crossings. For example, near me, there is a designated cycle route from Ramsden Square to Woodhead Drive. This means cyclists would either have to go the wrong way along the cycle path or proceed down the pavement to get to the crossing. At the same place, many children from East Chesterton cross to go to school at the North Academy via Woodhead Drive. Again, they will be against the flow. In agenda item 8, which you've all got there, it states, the design team says it has incorporated facilities to allow cyclists to legally access signalised crossing points from nearby side roads by including short two-way sections. The distance from Ramsden Square to Woodhead Drive is quite a long way, not a short section. My concern is that after the lovely uninterrupted one-way ride of 3-metre cycleways from Arbury Road to this point, the lanes will suddenly become two-way and half the size, and cyclists will either go on the path or on the road. Also, has the fact that cyclists tend to wait for lights at right angles on the road been taken into account, and that they may encroach on the cycleway? Will the cycle lanes be made wider to accommodate the two-way cycling, plus extra for cycles and pedestrians waiting to cross, as there's definitely space to do here if you reduce the length of the bus lane? And could you please clarify what happens between those two particular junctions, please?
Thank you, Maureen. So, 2 questions there, Peter, on air monitoring, and particularly at that junction, including the Woodhead Drive part.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of Jocelyn's questions around regular updates, absolutely, and I think I said that at the Joint Assembly. We will be continuing with the liaison forums. We will particularly want to discuss what the construction plans are for both schemes, because there will be a series of decisions to make as to how we deliver both these schemes at the same time. We will take on board the resolutions in terms of biodiversity, and in terms of parking. And I think, as you suggested, Paul is continuing to try and get the various parties together to discuss that. Landscaping, and I think I nail my colours to the mast of the Joint Assembly to say, rather than talk about budgets, we'll simply say we will deliver the landscaping that's outlined in the report in terms of dealing with that. We also undertook at the Joint Assembly in terms of the measuring and displaying to explore the options for that on MIlton Road, and so we will happily extend that to Histon Road, Lilian, and we are working with Smart Cambridge on what viable options we've got to achieve that. The cycling one, you know, we are trying to, or we've tried to get an optimal balance of all of the various functions along there. So we are going, as you've outlined, Maureen, with the one-way segregated cycle lanes on each side of the road. There are some sections where a crossing is quite close to a side road, and there is a need, therefore, to explore how we manage the movements of cyclists there, and we will be looking at short sections of two-way. But that doesn't extend to the Woodhead Drive and Ramsden Square, I'm afraid, because that is a long section. And that would make that section really quite different to the rest of the scheme we're bringing forward. That said, and I take it back to my answer to Jocelyn, we're not now running away to a dark room, never to speak to you again. We will be continuing to having these discussions, noticeably about the foliage and on the roundabout, amongst other things, I'm sure. So we will continue to ensure that we fine-tune the scheme to make sure it meets as many of the objectives that we've set ourselves as possible. And in a similar vein, I think Matthew makes a very fair point around traffic signals. You may well know, the board will know, that we're separately doing a piece of work on traffic signals generally, but we will picking up specifically on all of our corridors, MIlton and Histon Road included, to ensure that they provide the maximum benefit to the physical infrastructure that we're putting in, and that we give as much priority as we possibly can to pedestrians, cyclists and bus users. I hope that's clear, Chair.
Covered it enough on air monitoring? Yeah.
I think I gave my commitment.
Okay. Okay. And there'll be a reply to Matthew Danish. So we then move on to the report itself, including taking account of the points that have been raised by the speakers, including the chair of the LLF. Peter Blake again.
Thank you, Chair. I was hoping I'd picked up on most of Jocelyn's points earlier on. I don't propose to say a great deal about this. All I would is echo the points that Jocelyn's made, both through the sort of development of this scheme, but also in the 2 liaison forums that have taken place since the turn of the year, to talk about this in detail, to agree what is the best way forward. And I think what's before you is a solution that people have sort of broadly welcomed, Chair.
Yep, thank you. They have. Any comments?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a superb scheme that has become really good through the changes that have been made more recently, and with some really good detailing that will help us elsewhere. Yeah, so it's, I mean, I really commend the efforts that have been made. Obviously, the next question is what we do next. This is a scheme that has joins up 2 nasty bits of road, so we need to be thinking about that sooner rather than later. Obviously, Mitcham's Corner is at one end, is a really hostile area for cyclists and pedestrians, and I realise that it's an important part of the circulation of traffic, as a system for traffic circulation, car circulation. But we do need to be thinking a little bit further ahead about when we reduce the amount of car traffic. I mean, I was reading something on that I came across on social media about if you do reduce the car space, the amount of car traffic does decline naturally. Whether we as obviously we've all been seeing the opposite happen, where you increase the amount of road space for motorised traffic, the volume increases. But I mean, we need to look more and talk more about this. But I think we need to be certainly thinking as soon as we get the possibility of getting alternatives in place, then we come back to looking at seriously at Mitcham's Corner.
I'm just going to follow up on that, in that, to me, Mitcham's Corner is unfinished business. We've got the City Council's area action plan, and I can recall when Ian and I and a number of others went to have a look at the road at a very early stage. We decided that at that stage that Mitcham's Corner wasn't something that we could at that time make a change to, but I do think that the board needs to have a further look at that. And in the same vein, in a way, the hostile environment at the north end of MIlton Road between this scheme and the A14 needs to be addressed as part of work on North East Cambridge. So there's definitely further work to be done at those two ends. Yep. Bates?
I would agree with those comments, Mr. Chairman, particularly related to Mitcham's Corner. I want to just pick up really about where we go next, because what we've got is we've reached the final design, we're getting into some details, picking up comments from the residents about air quality or particular points from cycling campaign. I think it's quite important now that we're going to move fairly quickly, I suspect, and maybe not as quick as I would like, but that's another issue, okay, into construction, you know, the road closures, where it's the diversions, the actual time it takes to do that. And I think actually that comes back, I think, to those local liaison forum meetings, which Peter's committed to anyway, and so am I, okay? But I think we will go into pretty quickly, because when I read the report and I looked at the map on page 66, you can see a nice red line called MIlton Road, and that just demonstrated to me that there is going to be considerable disruption while the construction happens. And I think we do need to perhaps talk about the procurement, about how that works, because that's not a simple process as in itself, and how we go through some of those other details as we go towards more construction time frames, etc. So I'm quite keen that we extend it a little bit in respect of the construction. It particularly relates to the recommendation A, Mr. Chairman, which is about the construction period. And I think we need to, if you like, start to talk to the residents, talk to the LFF about what that means, and talk, bearing in mind, people from Histon Road as well as MIlton Road. So that's really where I think I'm going from now.
Okay, on page 69, we've got the timetable, which also needs to link in with the timetable for Histon Road as well. Pardon, sorry about that. This is a road of finite space and one which has got of great importance, including its character to the people who live around it, as well as those that need to travel along it. The scheme does limit the capacity for cars and seeks to significantly improve the opportunities for cycling, and also assisted by the landscaping and detail design, also the opportunities just to get across it rather than it to act as a barrier. So we're obviously committed to following it through with the quality of work that is needed to honour all of the efforts that residents and the local liaison forum has put in, as well as a range of different people over time. And I'd also just like to mention Chris Tunstall, as well as reiterate the thanks to some of the people, including Paul, who've seen this project through. So I look forward to seeing progress, including to create an environment that will centre on an avenue of trees along the road. And I just think that we can add some grace to this road as well as improve it, both for people travelling along it and radically improve the current state of it. So I've got two recommendations here on page 65. Can I see those in favour? Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, and thank you for all of the work, including the time. I appreciate how much effort has been put into this by residents, and I hope that they feel that that time has been worthwhile. Thank you. Item 9, and we move on to Foxton, where we have the letter from the Chair of the Parish Council that Councillor Wotherspoon referred to earlier. But I think we move into this again with an introduction from Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick introduction. So essentially two elements of what we're looking at within the context of Foxton. One is the level crossing on the A10. The second is parking and interchange provision, given the growth in rail on that and projected further growth in rail and in the sort of future time levels. So regarding the A10, we've done a series of work updating the previous studies that have been undertaken that demonstrates there is value of getting rid of the level crossing. We've looked at both options of the bridge and of the underpass, but where the report takes us is to say, within the context of the A10 itself, just doing this section and not dealing with the other elements of the bottleneck, strategically, probably isn't the best use of resource, and actually within the context of what the GCP is set up to do in terms of developing sustainable travel solutions in and around Greater Cambridge, probably doesn't fully sit with that. It fits more within the bailiwick of the combined authority as the Strategic Transport Authority. So the proposal there would be that we provide all of that work, including bridge and underpass work, to the combined authority for their consideration, because we know that they're looking at strategic routes across the area. In terms of the parking and interchange at Foxton, quite a different position, I think, in terms of the recommendation, that there appears to be some very material benefits of providing additional parking and interchange, so that is cycle parking, walking and cycling provision, and links to the local bus services within that area. But that more work needs to take place, particularly with parishes and local residents, because we really need to ensure that not only does it comply with the neighbourhood plan, but we're delivering benefits to Foxton, not just to people who want to use Foxton rail station. So the proposal there is to say, actually, this probably does fall clearly within the work that we have been established to deliver, and we should take this forward by some form of public consultation in the near future, Chair.
Thank you both on the analysis on the original crossing and on the new proposals. Any contributors? Councillor van der Veer.
Yes, I definitely think that we've got to the right place with the recommendation on this. I think at this point, coming back to this issue of road capacity, greatly increasing the road capacity up the A10 at this particular point will just move the problem elsewhere and have a really detrimental impact, in particular on people in Harston. Nevertheless, I think, and as we are being recommended to do, looking at what we can do to make Foxton station itself be more attractive for people to catch them, as it were, going up the A10 in their cars. But also, I think there is an opportunity to make it more attractive for residents nearby to use other modes of transport as well. Foxton Station, as it is really unpleasant to use. A lot of people avoid using it for that reason. It's very difficult to get from one side to the other. So wherever you put the car park, it's going to be very difficult to get to the other side unless we do a lot of work to solve this issue. I mean, it's extremely... The topography of the site, the constraints on the site are very problematic. But as it is, you've got the Barrington cycle route, new cycle routes about to come in. How do you get to the other side? People in Foxton, how do you get to the other side? And then, yes, the locations of the car park. I mean, in terms of the locations, one sort of question on that is on the map. They're obviously designed so that not to cause any further constraints on a possible bypass in the future, but given that we don't know how long that would actually be, what you're effectively doing is pushing some of those options quite a bit further out than you would otherwise do. But with that caveat, I think we've got to the right place on this. And so, yeah, I mean, also with the emphasising the point that this needs to be just more than just about a car park, but about a whole rethink of how Foxton Station works.
Thank you. Councillor Bates and then Claire Ruskin.
I support the recommendations. I would like some actually information. It's on 4.1, where it talks about the downtime at this particular crossing. Now, we've got more than one or two crossings in Cambridge City and South Cambs, and I don't have that information in respect of how long it's down, for instance, in Cherry Hinton, okay, or in other places. So it might be useful, please, if you don't mind, seeing if we can't collect that information about the downtime in all the other crossings within the GCP area. I mean, I know how that might be.
If you want to go out there, I mean,
I've been
you
out
might
there.
have the occasional half day.
I have been out there with your colleagues, actually, Cherry Hinton in particular, actually, but it's not only Cherry Hinton, there are others. I mean, I know what it's in Ely, by the way, okay, downtime. I mean, at the moment, it's 30 minutes and will be predicted to be 3/4 of an hour. So I've got in my mind the benchmarks, but I think it would be useful for us when we're looking at schemes, because to look at maybe where it's downtime.
Just built a bypass.
Yes, I picked up the bill for that, which is very successfully, and it's been put in for a prize for the best design and best community project as well. So I look forward. So yeah, it's a bit like that at the moment, but you are prompting me, Mr. Chairman, so I'm taking up that thing. So all I support the recommendations, but I would like to know what the downtime is on all the other crossings that we've got in this area, please.
I don't think we'll get that immediately, but so if we could pick up that point, perhaps just as part of the conclusion points from Mr. Blake. Claire.
I do support the recommendations. However, I would like to make sure that the analysis of the downtime for the crossing is looking to the future. My understanding was, even though it's 15 to 20 minutes in the hour at the moment, which I do travel that road very, very frequently, and I do sit there for 20 minutes quite often, you cannot do it by public transport at the moment, not any way that is envisaged in the future either. If we have 3 times as many trains, which I believe was the number I remember, then that suddenly gets to being 60 minutes out of every hour, which is quite a bad equation. And it shunts the vehicles up such that they actually travel in a completely dense block all the way along that road. So there are implications of the increased frequency of trains that will have a really big knock-on effect of going up and down that road. It is a main thoroughfare between Melbourne and Royston and Cambridge, so it's used quite a lot. So we just need to think that that is actually an adequate solution. If we don't plan significant numbers of years ahead, as we know, we get very unstuck when things do come to the crunch.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to respond to Councillor Bates' point.
Just the other point, that travelling this very frequently from Baldock and Royston, it actually just displaces the traffic through Orwell at the moment. So Google Maps, for example, takes account of the level crossing, I think, displaces all the traffic to the A603, which doesn't necessarily benefit us in total.
Thank you. So I think this is at heart an issue whether or not it's a good use of the limited funding that the GCP's got, as well as other factors. So I think originally in 2015, this scheme was not part of our project because it didn't score as highly, particularly given our objective at heart is to get people in and through Cambridge. And I think that's where we've come back to. We do there in the process now have some detailed work on how a bypass would work, but it's just not something that within the Greater Cambridge Partnership that we've got the priority to fund at this time. That doesn't mean it will never happen, but as Councillor van der Veer has said, there are also issues of modal shift here and the need to enable public transport to operate better, linking up not just Foxton, but also Shepworth and Meldreth, because there's a need for transport other than rail in this area and along the A10. So I think overall, there's been quite a lot of work done, and in consultation with the parish council and others, we'll have a look with South Cambridgeshire at what improvements can be made. So there'll be a further report on that. So if I take the recommendations on page 107, in the optimistic hope that there'll be unanimity, can I go to the vote? Oh, there is. Thank you. So if we can move on to item 10, that takes us on to the biomedical campus, on which we've got two public questions from Jim Chisholm and from Sam Davies. So if we could start with those. Jim? We seem to be seeing you once a week at the moment. So, right, your question on the biomedical campus.
Fiddling while Rome builds. In 2011, there was a report to the Cambridge Area Joint Committee about an area-wide parking plan for South Cambridge. Little progress has been made. A telling phrase in that report is, over time, the park and ride sites have become an increasingly important as a means of facilitating accessing the hospital, which is now impacting on its key role of facilitating access to the city centre. Today's reports for the CBC seem to have forgotten that key role of park and ride and suggest spending tens of millions of pounds on expanding park and ride as a free facilities for the CBC. Is that not a conflict with the possible workplace charging? The real solution is the Cambridge South Station, rendering such park and ride facilities as redundant and unsustainable, but interim solutions are available. Sustainable solutions such as turn-up-and-go buses to serve the CBC could be provided. These are being trialled from Papworth, but hardly turn up and go. We need more buses on the A10, A1301 and A1307. Have these been costed? They could be supported not only by CBC, but also by other big employers in the area. That should create a win-win for operators and passengers. Many drive just a few miles to a park and ride, yet have a nearby bus stop. Make the buses frequent and reliable and the customers will come. That would free park and ride for more appropriate use. This does need easy-to-achieve inbound flow control on radials such that buses bypass the queues of private car traffic. Why have we not done these easy wins of traffic regulation and better buses already? Can the GCP publish a matrix of car trips to the CBC and park and rides sites showing trips easily captured by an improved bus service? Thank you.
Jim. And second question from Sam Davies before I ask Peter Blake to respond.
The findings of the Cambridge Biomedical Campus Transport Needs Review should not have come as a surprise to members of this board, the Joint Assembly, or indeed any elected members in the Greater Cambridge area. It certainly came as no surprise to residents, myself included, who have been lobbying vigorously on the need for urgent action for over a decade. As you know, what the review describes is a network already operating at almost full capacity, which faces the prospect of 30 to 40% traffic growth in the next 5 years, and then a similar further increase to 2031, leading to a forecast of 67,500 daily trips to the campus by the end of that period. This prospect was rightly described by members of the Joint Assembly as scary, a view shared by the staff, patients and visitors who need to access the campus, and by local residents concerned at the impact on their quality of life. Given this context, I have two questions for the board this afternoon. The first concerns the 47 short-term interventions identified in the review. Given the multiple stakeholders on the campus, how does the GCP propose to convert these suggested interventions into distinct, funded actions with identified accountability and appropriate monitoring processes delivered within an acceptable timeframe? The second concerns the longer-term prognosis. The review emphasises the critical game-changing importance of Cambridge South Station. Can the board explain what the GCP's fallback plan for maintaining access to the campus is if Cambridge South Station does not open in 2023, as forecast in the review, but instead at a later date, consistent with Network Rail's estimate of 2025, or the combined authorities' recently published press release suggesting opening in 2027.
Thank you, Sam. And yes, the residents have been waiting a long time. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. So I suppose a number of points, and I'll try and deal with them together. The report, which we placed before the board today, is a comprehensive review of the traffic and transportation issues within the area, both the biomedical campus and the surrounding area. And in terms of expectation management, it doesn't come up with a magic plan. It says these are some of the key considerations that the GCP, the other statutory agencies and the biomedical campus and the partners need to consider taking it forward. Park and ride is one of those elements. I'm not sure I actually agree with the 2011 wording that park and ride is exclusively used for city centres, because if you look at Cambridge over the last 20 or 30 years, actually it's created a number of distinct centres. Yes, there's the city centre, there's clearly a centre in the biomedical campus, there's a centre around the science park, and there's an emerging centre around West Cambridge in Eddington. And actually, we need to look at all of the levers, park and ride included, to serve all of those things, because what we want to ensure is that traffic is kept out of or is managed to best effect. I entirely agree with the sentiment around Cambridge South Station, and I think that just reinforces the work that GCP, Combined Authority and Department for Transport are doing to develop that station concept. There's £10 million being invested to date to do that. The predicted timescale in the report aligns with the Network Rail timescale of 2024-2025, which is what we're working on to deliver that. But it emphasises the need to get on with that. And I think the report also emphasises the need to deliver the GCP infrastructure timetable as is outlined. So the main projects come on stream as planned, because otherwise it has an impact across Greater Cambridge generally, but particularly in terms of the biomedical campus area. I think in relation to bus services and sort of Jim's view on more bus services and the issue there, in principle we would absolutely agree with that. I think where we depart is that we don't believe it's easy. We're 30 years into a deregulated environment which says we've got the bus network we've got, and that's the deregulated environment that we've got. What we need to do is to put more bus services out there, and to do that costs money, and to do that requires more road space, or you reallocate the road space that you've got. And this was my first plug of the meeting, and there will be more, for the current Choices for Better Journeys engagement that is going on, that is asking those very questions as to what the communities of Greater Cambridge want to do, because they're the realistic options that we've got. How do we provide better bus services and create the journeys for that? The chair, my glamorous assistant, is putting forward the sort of the leaflet, and I would encourage people to respond to that sort of comprehensive survey we're undertaking. So in a sense, that is also my response to Sam in terms of what is the short-term options. There are options for significantly improving public transport, but there are things that need to be considered around doing that in terms of who's going to pay and how we create the road space. You can put on more buses and they'll get stuck in the same jams that everybody's in at the moment. So we need to find a way to change that balance. But we need to be absolutely assured that we're going to deliver Cambridge South Station, and we need to deliver to time the other major interventions that the GCP has got, Chair.
Kind of introduces the report.
So can I just add that the report doesn't come up with an answer. You know, what we're trying to do with the report has undertaken a fairly wide-scale analysis of what the issues are, which we're laying before the board. Yeah? What we're saying and what the report clearly says is you have to deliver Cambridge South Station, and GCP has to deliver its programme to time. And in addition, and there are 47 short-term recommendations, that rely on GCP, other statutory agencies and the partners. And what the recommendations say is they are tasking officers to go away and work with GCP, statutory agencies and partners to say just the very question that Sam asks, what's the delivery plan? What's the timetable? Who's going to pay for it? And when can we expect to see some improvements? And that the board would want to see an update in terms of how we're getting on with that. So we put the comprehensive report in front of you, Chair, and happily to take any questions from that.
Okay. Questions or comments? Ian, then Aidan, then I.
I agree with the report. I mean, and yes, we have known about it for decades. It's been obvious as the sites around us have developed. So my question is really, are there other sites as well as the biomedical campus, for example, the science park, that we should be looking at in the same way? It's not as intense an issue, but it is still a fairly intense issue.
Ian.
Thank you. Just a few comments. I fully support Cambridge South Station and have done for more than 1 or 2 years. I think when you look at the recommendations, Mr. Chairman, it talks in all three, the first two, which talks about short, medium. And I think we do need to actually look at long as well, because it's not just the short and the medium, it will be the longer term on this particular site. We all know that there's plans for children's hospitals to go on that site. We all know that there are other proposals that might be coming forward for other facilities on that site. I worked on that site for 37 years, so I know it very well. So I do support Sam's suggestion in respect to the longer term. I think what it comes down to is B, actually, because when you look about the report, which is what I call a starter for 10, but what it doesn't address, and I'll give you a couple of good examples. If you look at the actual report, for instance, my wife and I went to visit a sick friend of ours on a Sunday, and we pitched up at the Trumpington Park and Ride to get on the A bus to discover there is no A bus on a Sunday to take visitors to. So we had to get back in our car and drive to Addenbrooke's down Long Road, which I did for too many years. And it's that sort of thing that we do need to work with the businesses on the site, the universities, the Addenbrooke's, and also biomedical centres like AstraZeneca. So it takes me really to the request, because if you take another view, what I don't have a feel for is what action the biomedical campus are proposing. Let me give you 1 or 2 suggestions. Saturdays and Sundays, very little traffic against Monday, okay? So why not do outpatients appointment on a Saturday and Sunday? So my thing, for instance, might be is how we work with the biomedical campus about not what we're talking about, but what they're talking about and how they see it panning out. Because you can do there is a distinct shift between acute and community as well for doing more outreach services. I again went to Potter's Bar this week on Sunday, and only to walk through the door to see that Moorfields Hospital do a lot of outpatients there. They don't travel into central London. So my request really is, understand the report, it is a starter for 10. So I want to see us much more engaged with the biomedical centre, and I certainly would have an interest in attending some of those discussions with officers to see what we can do jointly together in partnership to actually look at this for the residents around that area. Appreciate that's just 1 or 2 suggestions, but I think actually we do need to move forward, because by the time these things come, there will be a children's hospital there before we know it.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, the idea is not really to go on too much about the past and how we've got here, but even now, things that are happening now are really quite dispiriting. We've just opened section link between the busway and the main hospital, past AstraZeneca and Papworth, which has no cycleway across it. You have to share the buses, back to sharing the buses. We're opening roads which have on-road cycle lanes rather than proper segregated cycle lanes. This report is one can only hope is one of our best chances of doing something about it. It is worth recognising that GCP, even though we would want it to, doesn't have the sole power to solve all these problems. So it is a combined effort, but I think we have a role in leading on it. Although the recommendation we've got is sort of noting findings and receiving reports, I think what underlying that is a recognition that the range of partners involved will certainly benefit from us helping bring them together and focus on the things that will actually make a difference. So it is really positive, and I very much hope that we can. We need to sort of keep, I think, discussing this here in this forum.
Yeah, just linking to a couple of the comments that have been made. I think, as Claire, you said that this could be a base model for looking at the other sort of points on the compass, so that we've got major destinations, in this case a hospital complex, as well as a lot of people working there in sort of south, north, east and west. So overall, I think that this basic analysis needs to be done for the other compass points as well. And there will be opportunities, including in northeast Cambridge, to look at that for the north. I do think that the Addenbrooks and the employers on this site need to take greater ownership of the issue and the problem. And I think that the structure that's proposed in B, I would add, if people are in agreement, also needs to say, and including residents of the adjacent communities, because this is a challenge faced by Queen Edith's, it's faced by Trumpington, it's faced by Hawkston, and I think what we need to do is work with the Biomedical Campus Partnership so that they take ownership. It would come if the outcome of the work on the deadline 31st of March includes pursuing workplace parking levy, because I do see that as one of the routes to engaging employers and Addenbrooks in actually thinking through different transport alternatives. I think this site is overly car dominated. I don't think that's healthy. It's not healthy for the adjacent communities. It's not even healthy for the people who are breathing the air at Addenbrooks, because there are far too many vehicle journeys. I appreciate it's not simple when you've got patients and visitors, many of whom have got little opportunity currently to use public transport. But we do have a base of employers here that we need to work with to avoid the current 30,000 trips rising in the number of car journeys in the future. So yes, the Cambridge South Station is vital, as is the expansion of park and ride capacity, and answering Jim Chisholm's issue about looking at ways that the network can be improved. I would really love to see a bus service between Babraham Park and Ride and Trumpington Park and Ride, because at the moment it isn't actually easy to drop and get into different corners of this site. And I just believe that we're just continuing to see more and more roads built around the biomedical campus, when in fact there are non-car ways that can be addressed. It's awful trying to walk or cycle through this site. It really is dreadful. And some of that has just been the lack of joined-up planning of how to develop particularly the Addenbrooks site. So I think there's great opportunities here, but I do think that that should extend to involve residents, and I do think that we need to do our bit, along with other providers of transport but we do need to get the campus working as a partnership. And I would hope that they would have a full-time transport officer. I don't know whether they're close to that, because I just think that the challenge is sufficient for them to work together and find some of the solutions themselves. Councillor Bates?
I would support your suggested change recommendation.
Yep.
I would also like to propose that we add the word long, where it says short, medium, long term in both A and B, because I think it's not a short-term fix or a medium, it could be a long-term fix as well. So I would certainly propose that is added to the recommendations, but I do think we need to engage with them, and the sooner we can actually do that with the residents, the sooner we can actually come to perhaps a more stronger view about the way forward.
With those two to be, to both engage with the residents of the adjacent communities and to add Ian's word long. Yeah.
Yes, I wouldn't put long in A.
Your contribution, Councillor Wotherspoon.
Yes, I've just been thinking about one of the things you said, Chairman, about the fact that the site is far too much car-dominated. And I think we ought to bear in mind that one of the reasons for that is it's actually very difficult to access by public transport. And if you have an appointment, you can't really run the risk of not getting there on time. And for a lot of the northern villages, for example, you can't get directly anymore by bus, when we did have a bus service, from, for example, Cottenham used to be able to go directly to Addenbrooke Station. You now have to change in the city centre, things like that. So as you make access by car more difficult, you do have to be mindful that you must ensure that you don't disadvantage access to healthcare. And one of the points that I was going to throw in was that actually there was an interesting article in The Economist this week on sexual health clinics and the model that they perhaps offer for healthcare in future, partly because one of the reasons that there seems to have been a bit of an improvement in sexual health generally is that it's actually much easier to access these services because they're increasingly offered as a drop-in facility. And where you have a centre of health as good as and attractive as Addenbrooke's and its associated facilities, and if this model is extended to other forms of healthcare, if people are not able to drop in very easily, it puts a brake on the development of healthcare along those lines.
I think it also underlines the fact that not everything should be located at Addenbrooke's because it simply cannot cope with everything being there. So again, plugging the consultation, I do think that whilst there's been in the past, including in the document Jim Chisholm referenced, to focus on the city centre, actually tackling Cambridge and Greater Cambridge with a look to reduce congestion would hugely change whether or not people travel to Addenbrooke's by public transport, because at the moment it is an unreliable journey. With those amendments, we will take the recommendations on page 115. Those in favour? Jolly good. So we move on to item 11.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a short report on the Chisholm Trail. Many of you will have seen the press cuttings of the works commencing on site recently. And so it provides a short update in terms of the phase 1. The focus of the report is on the phase 2 work. We've now completed the design estimates, and particularly we have an opportunity this summer for Network Rail to undertake some of the works as part of their planned improvements on the rail network.
Bridge.
And it would be jolly nice to have the sort of Heineken effect of doing two things at once. That's the report, Chair.
Thank you. And thank you to the author of this trail, Mr. Chisholm, who's here with us. So any comments? No, I think we're very happy. Clearly, the rail operators have their challenges, but it's quite critical that we engage with them and get the routes, including the linkages and the crossovers that we need to achieve. So if I take the recommendations on page 151, those in favour? Thank you. So we move on to item 12, rural travel hubs.
Thank you, Chair. As the Chair of the Joint Assembly outlined in his introduction, this actually generated quite a bit of discussion at the Assembly. Essentially 3 components. So in my simple mind, we'll do it in 3 steps. Whittlesford Parkway, I think there was broad support to say, piece of work being done. We've had initial stakeholder feedback. There is something we need to get behind here in terms of developing Whittlesford as a real interchange that offers material benefits to local community. So we should take that forward and look to initiate wider public consultation later in the year. Sawston Rural Travel Hub, there was no clear agreement and no real support for any of the options that were put forward as part of the public consultation. And it felt like it would make sense for that concept to be wrapped up more closely with the Cambridge South East work on the major public transport corridor route that we're taking forward. And so that would feel like a better fit.
Got a couple of speakers on Oakington. So if I...
Have we?
Yep.
Yeah. The parish.
So, it was my fault. I should have started by first inviting Dr. Stephen Moore and then Councillor Peter Hudson. So, Stephen Moore, can you just ask your question or make your comments, and then we'll follow up with Peter. And then hopefully I timed that well for you then to come back in on that part of the contribution.
Thank you for listening to me. It's a statement and not a question.
Your patience.
No, it's been interesting, eye-opening, in fact, and lots of points made, which
hopefully in a positive fashion.
In a positive fashion so far. Just wanted to say we challenge the recommendations, particularly the one which is that to be a rural travel hub with parking. We think that the information which has been provided to the officers and the information which you've gleaned points directly to a rural traffic hub without parking. That we feel that supports, in fact, is entirely consistent with the position of the GCP to improve public transport provision and limit traffic movement in the greater Cambridge area, of which Oakington is a part. So we ask that our village be treated as equal, with equal consideration to that being given to residents of Cambridge. First of all, let me just make a few points. It will be brief. You'll see it's quite short, so I want to keep it long. It's traffic. For members who don't know, Oakington Westwick is in effect an outer suburb of Cambridge. It's 4.5 miles to city centre, and it is largely situated along what was until 10 years ago a small, quiet country lane which linked to a much larger village, Cottenham. And it is still classified as a B road. With the growth of Cottenham, and I believe there are further 700 houses to be built there, this quiet country lane has developed into a very busy road, totally unsuited for its use of commuter traffic from the A14 and from Cottenham, etc., into Cambridge. This increase in traffic has made life a misery for those living along it. And the road is both dangerous and noisy. But it's dangerous for parents and children who attend the primary and preschools located very near the proposed rural travel hub. Indeed, Councillor Hudson and I will speak later. and an officer from Highways Department recently were called to an emergency meeting with a head teacher after a number of dangerous incidents involving children, one extremely close to, being knocked down, has happened outside the school. So the proposal for the RTH with parking, the recommendation, would inevitably lead to an increase in traffic passing through Westwick from Cottenham and Oakington, and from through Oakington and from other nearby villages. We conclude that the RTH would function entirely to the benefit of Cottenham at the expense of our own residents. Indeed, we'd further argue the actual concept of the RTHs in villages circling Cambridge is to the benefit of Cambridge City residents and derives from a Cambridge City-oriented perspective on traffic matters taken by the GCP. And I feel the conversation today has been interesting exactly for that reason. The conversation seems to be about protecting Cambridge City. Parking. The second point I want to make is parking. No matter what number of parking spaces are provided, we all know that there will be an overflow onto the roads outside. Very brief. We have no means of enforcing parking outside. Two last points. Local knowledge. We think the officers who attended have ignored all points we've made, including the fact that buses do not stop at Oakington at the moment at rush hour because they're already full. There's also North Stowe is being built 100 metres away from the proposed site. No link has been made with Homes England, who are building North Stowe, regarding the fact that the bus will go through there. Can I make recommendations? We suggest there should be an RTH with no parking. There should be a bus turning circle with secure storage facilities. And we suggest that the C6 bus service from Cambridge to Oakington should be extended by 400 metres to a turning circle at the bus stop, and that in the morning the same bus should continue to Cottenham to pick up commuters from there. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We haven't had advance copy, but obviously...
I have copies here to give you. I'm afraid...
But if you give them to Wilma, who's sitting behind, then we'll make sure that they get put into the system.
It's essentially a statement I made to the Assembly. Sorry.
Oakington for their comments. I don't regard as... I mean, if it comes across as Cambridge-centric, then that's not the case. It is about... public transport and about transport across Greater Cambridge. And certainly the ambition of the current consultation is actually, in net terms, to improve transport as much, at least, in the wider geography, because at the moment, with the lack of investment and funding for bus services, we're just not able to provide people a non-car alternative. But clearly, I can't imagine that I can get all of the point across in this short contribution, but clearly a dialogue with South Cambridgeshire, I think with the villagers, will assist, along with the visits from the discussion here out to different parts, including areas in South Cambridgeshire in the next couple of weeks. But no, we definitely want to hear from South Cambridgeshire communities what would transform transport for them too. And thank you for your contribution. Peter Hudson. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate the time you've given us, and I particularly appreciate you allowing the parish chair to address you as opposed to a public question. I find it really difficult, sir, to accept that the wishes of one community are forced upon another community against the wishes of the majority of that community. Oakington and Westwick, as you've heard, is a fraction of the size of Cottenham. The Royal Travel Hub is proposed to be built in Oakington, but the consultation spread wider to include the much larger settlement of Cottenham. Therefore, when the results were analysed, the majority went for option 1 with car parking, as opposed to option 2 with secure cycle parking, as the majority of the Oakington residents opted for. You've just heard about the primary school and the issues we have with the primary school. It's located just up the lane. Yeah, it's a lane, it's Water Lane. It's a lane for a reason. We already have the safety issues, as you've just heard. And at the end of the day, when does a travel hub, in reality, become a park and ride? £1 million of funding has been approved for a brand new cycle path to link Cottenham and Oakington. Therefore, surely it makes sense to connect this with the new travel hub, if it goes ahead, to encourage more and more people to get on their bicycles and out of their cars. This is very much supported by the local residents of Oakington. I have friends who live in Cottenham, so I went to visit them. And as always, as I visit my friends in Cottenham, we visit community spaces. And in those community spaces, we chat to people who are in those community spaces, hence the residents of Cottenham. And on mentioning the travel hub, as one drops in conversation, every single Cottenham resident within that conversation, and I have to say without, there was a few eavesdroppers, supported parking their cars in Oakington. But I have to say, probably more importantly, some did state, a lot did, not all, but a lot did state, if there was no parking, they would in fact cycle on our new wonderful cycle path, which is going to be built. The only very tragic outcome of this exercise, sir, has been to actually set village against village, community against community, and that is exactly what has happened. Oakington, as you've heard from our chair, is next to Northstowe. That'll have its own travel hub with the existing park and ride I'll pinch from Longstanton. The centre of Northstowe is about 5 or 10 minutes from Oakington at a brisk walk or cycle, or about 4 minutes on the guided bus. The build-out of Phase 2, which includes the town centre, is imminent. There are many other communities that are crying out for travel hubs. So perhaps maybe some other community may have a higher priority at this particular time than the community of Oakington and Westwick. Cambourne, for example, where we sit today, I'm sure would love a travel hub. So, a question I'm asking perhaps, is this the right time to be spending valuable funding on one community perhaps a little bit too early? Perhaps the time to look at this travel hub is when the extended network is in place and settled to ensure this hub is actually not in the wrong place, as it could well be. So, what I'm asking is this, sir, of you and your committee. If you decide that this scheme should go ahead, please listen to the local residents who will be affected by this scheme and build for secure parking. Do not build, cancel that. Build for secure cycle parking, Mr. Wordout. As in option 2, we want option 2. Totally reject option 1, where you will swamp one community with the vehicles of another community. Or we could even be braver and decide against both options and use the funding where perhaps it may be needed more at this present time. So then we can go and try and heal the animosity that has been created between our two communities. Thank you, sir.
So that is added material for your coverage of recommendation B on page 161. I don't know if you've got any notes, Councillor Hudson, but obviously it would be good to, we've recorded it, but to be able to say what the key points you made were.
I have the notes down here. Yeah, I'll pass them on, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so do you want, sorry, we kind of took it in the wrong order, Peter, but if you were able to take account of some of that, but it may be that there needs to be a further discussion on elements.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's a great deal to say that you know, the two councillors have articulated the nature of the dilemma that we face. What I probably would draw you to is actually the Joint Assembly considered this and did consider whether or not we should be doing these anyway, certainly at this point in time. But obviously, it's a decision that the board will need to reflect on in terms of the recommendations. Hopefully, I articulated the sort of Whittlesford and Sawston. There was considerable consensus around. There was less consensus, or indeed there isn't consensus around Oakington, as has been clearly articulated.
Okay. Contributions from people. Claire, I'm waiting for Aidan's contribution as well.
Aidan is more South Kent.
Claire first and then Aidan.
Well, I'm the unprofessional in the room, so I'm allowed to make a comment. I am moved by, I'm very moved by Councillor Hudson's points, and I can completely understand them. Given the list of things that we're doing, do we really need to do that at the moment? So, I mean, I recollect that we were led to choose the villages that we were exploring from requests from the parish councils. So I'm slightly perplexed about it, but nonetheless, having heard what you've said, it would seem that even if you did request it in the first place, you've realised the dreadful implication.
Councillor van der Beer.
Well, there's clearly neither a sort of compelling strategic or it's hard to tell much of a business case at present for this, and there's clearly not a lot of not very strong local support. So it's as things stand, I can quite understand the positions, the views being expressed. We do have to consider sort of where we're going a little bit further in terms of how we plan for traffic movements, people's movements around and alternatives to cars. We just had the bus review from the Combined Authority, which had the concept of travel hubs there as quite an important part of how they see the bus services in the county. And we have here a fairly modest concept of a travel hub that would have links, if we got the City 6 up here, which is I mean, a precondition really, as well as the busway and some cycle links, both to Godden but also along the busway as it is. So there are the elements of a travel hub here, and it is an early stage of developing the concept. So I think given the failure to get anywhere with the Foxton one, I think we would have to think carefully about stopping this one, just as sort of rather how it might make it harder to get the idea going in the future. On the specific point of the car parking, I'm a bit torn. Again, as we were talking about before, spending money on helping cars isn't where we should be at. But nevertheless, they will have their place, as we were talking about with the biomedical campus. Many people do need to use their cars, and so it's about less about stopping people driving than providing better alternatives and thinking about the trade-offs and the balance between the two. So the car parking issue, I can see the arguments. I think probably given to make this successful, as in well used, it would need to have an element of parking. But that's where I've sort of got to, as it were. I'd be interested to see in other comments. So
On recommendation B, where would you want to lead us? Because what you're saying isn't quite what's in that wording, and clearly there's different views about what's the right solution.
There is. I think that reluctantly, I think doing it without any form of parking would limit the type of use and therefore the flexibility that it would have. That's where I've got to. I mean, it's whatever it is. How many spaces are there? 30 or 40 spaces? 38 spaces. So it would be, if it's going to function properly as a travel hub, that would be just an element of it, rather than a park and ride of the scale of talking about a Foxton or something like that. So there has been quite a lot of engagement. I think we've got to where we are, but so it's getting to the point of decision. So I mean, I would be interested to hear other views as well, but I mean, Claire's already said.
Ian Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by winding the clock a little further back. I think you and I were there when the concept of rural hubs was being developed. And I was actually quite attracted to rural hubs. And it's fair to say I'm still attracted to rural hubs, but not just in one place, okay, or two places or three places, but actually, from memory, we had 10 on the list, but there's a lot more villages in South Cambs than 10. So I'm still attracted to rural hubs and getting people out of their cars. They have to be in the right place. They have to link into the bus services and they have to link into the routes. And of course, some of them will never happen because they haven't got that sort of link. So I'm still quite attracted to it. It's very regrettable that you put one village against the other, okay? I understand now how that happened, okay, because the people of one village see that as quite an attractive solution to their transport problems. But if you go back to the principles that we established with rural hubs, I have to say my regret actually is only doing 3. We should have done 23, okay, maybe. But the principle is still there, and I'm still trying to retain that principle. In relationship to the two speakers, thank you for coming, thank you for speaking. My principle that I'm going to say is I understand the cycleway, understand that connection as well, understand it's going to be space for 38 spaces, but as a principle and as a pilot, as it says in the recommendation, because that's what it is, a pilot, I have to say I do agree with the recommendations as laid out on the paper. Appreciate the fact that not everybody will agree with me, and I expect my colleague would disagree with me, okay? But I have to sometimes what I call consider that bigger picture, and I think I have considered that bigger picture, but would wish to see us go further. What I would not want to happen, absolutely not happen, is this is the only one we build, okay? Because I think we need to actually develop the rural travel hubs in lots more locations. So I want a commitment, if you like, from my colleagues that we are not just going to build this one, but we want to build some others. Forget where the others are for the moment, but I think we do need to go around that. We do need the support of South Cambs about where they think those locations might be, linking into the bus routes, linking into where it might be practical or it might not be. But my opposition, as you might say, would be if I have to only deliver this one, that will be a failure on my part.
Anything? Other thing, Claire?
A travel hub without cars sounds like a bus stop to me, but that's maybe naive. Have we consulted on putting the travel hub in or closer to Cottenham? Because we have seen this before where we've done consultation which is flooded by people who object and not responded to by the people who need the service. So we have seen that sort of thing before. Are we asking the question of could it be sited somewhere nearer the centre of gravity of the number of people that would want to use it? Would the people of Oakington and Westwick walk out the however many minutes to the one at Cottenham or Northstowe? I feel quite uncomfortable that we're imposing something in a way that seems counterintuitive.
I'm also looking at, well, I have to admit, I haven't looked hard at the detail. I hadn't got notice that this issue was going to get raised. But I'm certainly interested in the cycleway aspect to it and how that links in. So I personally think you can't have a hub without some transport. I'm focusing in on today's issue rather than the ambitions, including, I think, to have a hub in Camborne, but the it's what detail should we take forward. So I do think that there should be engagement with Oakington. I think the host has a say about a hub, and I'm just I would prefer to bring Oakington back, and I expect that we'll probably have similar comments made again, but I just think that we should take account of the views that have been looked at and do a response as part of a dialogue before we press the go button. Councillor van der Veer.
Part of the reasons I was giving for going ahead with it, and not too similar to Councillor Bates, is that how it would fit in with some of the sort of future transport. And I don't want to prejudice the outcome of the, the consultation and the work on the current consultation on the choices, better choices. I mean, could this be an element of the transport network that we'll get to with the really much improved public transport service that we're envisaging? I mean, as you understand it at the moment, or is it really either too early to say or pretty much contradictory to it's going in a different direction? I mean,
Councillor Bates has got some suggested words.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't know if you want to add anything, Peter.
Sorry, yeah. Do you want to come?
No.
Perhaps a suggestion as the way forward, Mr. Chairman. I'm particularly looking at B. Okay. I wouldn't take out the development of design and seek planning consent. And I'd start with something. This pilot rural hub at Oakington, based on option 1 in brackets general parking, to come back with a further report to the Assembly and the Executive Board to consider alternative locations for this hub. That therefore gives the opportunity for both Cottenham and Oakington perhaps to have a look at it. Apologies, maybe that's not all the right words, but I think we've got most probably better people that will do words for me. I think what that says is we haven't said yes, we haven't said no, but we'll look at alternatives and come back to the Assembly. I'll link it particularly to the C6 bus route as well, and linking it to North Stowe and everything else, and maybe a more comprehensive look at that issue in the longer term with North Stowe, with the C6 bus, etc., and the guided bus. Perhaps it might be sensible to look at it in a more strategic direction.
Okay.
Chair, if I may, and that would align with the comments that Aidan made around the current engagement process that we've got ongoing.
So we continue the engagement process and bring back a report.
I am a resident of Cottenham, so please bear that in mind. I'll just reiterate one of the comments that was made at the Joint Assembly, which is that a hub without spokes is not a hub. And I'd like to point out draw particular attention to paragraphs 8.2 and 8.4. Little support was expressed for the development of the Oakington and Sawston rural travel hubs. And there was a question about the strategic nature or otherwise of a rural travel hub at Oakington and Westwick, because one member in particular stressed that the GCP should be concentrating its resources on interventions which would have a significant impact on the Greater Cambridge Partnership objectives. And there was particular reference to the much greater need of places like Camborne. And it's worth reminding ourselves why this problem has arisen in some
Doesn't help me with B.
Yeah.
What's your, when are you getting to that point, please?
Yes, I am there, because when the busway was mooted, it was promised that there would be feeder services to the stations along the route. And the lack of those feeder services is one of the reasons why we have come up with the Rural Travel Hubs idea. Now, those of us who are familiar with the location and workings of the busway stop at Oakington and Westwick would probably tell you that it's actually very difficult to get an alternative location which would do the job. So I think you should make the decision today. Either you go ahead with B as it stands, or you just drop the Oakington Rural Travel Hub. That would be, on the basis of the Joint Assembly's discussion, that would be my advice to you today.
Well, so on the detailed design and of a pilot rural travel hub at Oakington, the current option is considered along with the potential for other sites.
That would be my suggestion.
Which is what I think we should proceed with. I don't think, I mean, having been involved in projects in the city and across wider geographies, I do sympathise with part of your point, Councillor van der Veer, that if we just don't proceed, then nothing will happen for years and years. There'll be a kind of shadow of the fact that there was a discussion. And I do think that we need to just take the principle that we ask officers to do some further work and engagement. B, on the detailed design for a pilot rural travel hub at Oakington, option 1 is considered along with the options for potential other locations, and a further report is brought back. As part of that process, there will be a wider dialogue about the role of the cycleway and the quantum of parking needed.
So, I mean, my general view is with Councillor Wotherspoon, we go ahead with it or we don't go ahead with it. The one question is this sort of how it fits in with the evolving, emerging strategy from the wider choices. So we might be able to get something out of that for a future visit of it, but I don't think we can have it sort of hanging on forever.
Bring the further report back. Happy with that, subject to the clarity on the wording? So,
I'm content, Mr. Chairman, to support that recommendation.
Okay. I mean, personally, I do believe some parking will be needed. You can't, part of the purpose that we started looking at rural travel hubs was we need to take account of the environmental impacts and the needs of parking in different communities. But the purpose is to provide hubs where, even with the extra investment in public transport, it may not be feasible to create additional services. Yes, those people in times past talking about how the busway would work with interlinked bus services had noble objectives, but the issue is whether in the future we will be able to sustain the range of bus services that people might anticipate. So with that amendment...
I'm content with the recommendations. I think all I would say to the two speakers is when it comes back, I believe for the community that you represent, we should come to a firm decision when it comes back, for what I call whichever way it goes. I think for it to hang on any longer than that would be inappropriate. I'll just give you that sort of what I call proviso.
Yeah, there's another day in court or whatever.
Yes.
Okay. So with the change to B, can I put the 5 recommendations? And I do think I'd like us to add a 6th, which is that we do look as a GCP at Camborne, as was discussed at the Assembly.
Chair, if it helps, we're already looking at a hub in Camborne as part of the Camborne to Cambridge project. Okay,
so we just recognise that Camborne is part of the hubs that we need to address. I'll put the revised recommendations to the vote. Those in favour? And thank you for the input from Oakington on that matter. There'll be further discussion. that concludes the meeting, other than the fact that we didn't really look at the forward plan. So I don't want to belabour it if members of the public who've been very patient and thoughtful, and thank you for your attendance. But I do want to just look back into the earlier report, just to review briefly. In the excitement of other things, I didn't really have a look. So in June, we've got reports on CAM, including, as there's now significant material coming through to the combined authority in a week's time. West of Cambridge package and city access, reviewing the consultation. The South East scheme, the strategic outline business case for that. We've got an important report on rail capacity study, given that there's been quite a lot of work there. And then in October, we've got Camborne to Cambridge, Histon Road, and turning the page, further work on a number of projects in December. So I just review that, because I just think it's important that we state publicly what we're going to be doing next. So thank you for everybody's attention and attendance and inputs, and with our next meetings in the Guildhall on the 27th of June. So I look forward to seeing you all again.